The sky was covered with thick gray clouds that afternoon. A light breeze moved through the small-town cemetery, carrying the smell of wet soil and old flowers. A young girl knelt by a single grave near the edge of the fence. Her small hands pressed against the cold stone as tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. She didn't look like she belonged there, not because she was too young, but because of the hope in her eyes. Most people who came to that place carried sadness, some carried regret, but this girl carried something different. Every time she came, she would whisper the same words softly, almost like a secret. "He's still alive." Her voice trembled as she said it again, staring at the name carved on the stone. The letters had already started to fade under the rain, but she knew every curve of them by heart. That name belonged to her father. People from the town had grown used to seeing her there. Some pitied her, others simply avoided looking. They thought she couldn't accept the truth. Her father had died 6 months ago in a terrible accident at his small workshop. Everyone had attended the funeral. They saw his body. They watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. To them it was final, but to the little girl it wasn't. Her name was Lily. She was only 10, but the way she sat there, quiet and steady, made her look older than her age. The loss had changed her, yet it hadn't broken her spirit. Each day after school, she would run to the cemetery, sometimes with a flower, sometimes just with her small notebook where she wrote down things she wanted to tell her father. On that particular afternoon, she spoke louder than usual. "Daddy, I told Mom you're still here, but she doesn't believe me. She says I'm dreaming. But I heard you last night, Daddy, I really did." Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she kept her gaze fixed on the ground. "You called my name. I heard you. I know you're trying to talk to me." Behind her, someone stopped by the gate. It was a tall man in a dark coat standing beside a shiny car. He had come to visit another grave, an old business friend who had passed away years ago. But now he couldn't take his eyes off the little girl talking to the stone. Something about her voice made him pause. He hesitated before walking closer, not wanting to scare her. "Hey there," he said gently. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Lily turned, startled. She quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "It's okay," she said softly. The man smiled kindly. "You come here often?" She nodded. "Every day." He crouched beside her, looking at the grave. "Was this your father?" "Yes," she whispered. "Everyone says he's gone, but they're wrong." The man studied her face for a moment. She didn't look lost or confused. She looked sure. "What makes you think that?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, glancing at the grave before answering. "Because I heard him calling me." "Last night?" Her words made the man blink. "Calling you? What do you mean?" "I was in bed," she said. It was really quiet. Mom was asleep. Then I heard someone say my name. It was his voice. He said, "Lily, help me." I woke up and ran here this morning, but no one believes me. The man didn't know what to say. He was used to logic and reason. He didn't believe in ghosts or strange voices. But the way she said it, calm, certain, and full of emotion, gave him chills. He looked down at the grave again. The earth looked untouched. The flowers were old, dried at the edges, yet someone had clearly been caring for the spot. Maybe the girl herself. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily." "That's a pretty name," he said kindly. "I'm Mr. Bennett." She gave a small nod, not smiling, just quietly studying him. He could see the loneliness in her eyes. "Do you live nearby?" he asked. She pointed to a small road that curved around the hill. "Just down there. Me and Mom live in the little house near the shop. That used to be Dad's garage." Mr. Bennett remembered passing that place earlier, a small, rundown workshop with a rusted sign. The windows were dusty and the gate was half broken. It didn't look like anyone had worked there in months. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly. Lily looked down. "I'm not sorry, because he's not really gone. Everyone says he's dead, but I can still feel him. When I come here, it's like he's close." Mr. Bennett didn't argue. He just listened. Something in his chest tightened. He had seen children broken by grief before, but this was different. This wasn't denial. It was faith. After a moment, he asked, "Do you come here alone?" She nodded. "Mom works late at the diner. She says it's not good for me to come, but I don't get scared. I feel safer here than anywhere else." Mr. Bennett looked around the empty cemetery. The wind rustled the grass and the sky grew darker. "You must be very brave," he said. She shrugged. I just miss him. He promised he'd never leave me. He said even if something bad happened, he'd always find a way to come back. Her words hit him deeply. There was something pure and painful about them. He stood up slowly. Do you mind if I sit here for a bit? Lily nodded slightly. You can. He won't mind. They sat together quietly. For a long while, neither spoke. The sound of distant cars faded, and all that remained was the wind and the rustle of leaves. Mr. Bennet found himself staring at the grave again. The soil looked old but uneven, as if it had been disturbed at some point. Maybe it was just rain erosion, but something about it seemed strange. After a while, he asked gently, Lily, can I ask something? When your father passed away, were you there? She nodded slowly. I was in the kitchen. Mom was screaming. They said there was gas in the workshop. When I went there, he was lying on the floor. The doctor said he stopped breathing. Did you see him after that? Only once, she whispered. Before they put him in the box. He looked like he was sleeping. I touched his hand and it was cold. But when I held it for a long time, I thought I felt it move. No one believed me. They said I imagined it. Mr. Bennet felt his throat tighten. He didn't want to question her pain, but something about that detail made him uneasy. And you said you heard knocking, too? She nodded again. The night before they buried him, I heard a sound from the room where the coffin was kept. It was like someone knocking, slow and soft. I told Mom, but she said it was just my nerves. But I heard it again last week when I was sitting here. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I heard something under the ground. Mr. Bennet didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure what disturbed him more, the idea of a child hearing things or the thought that she might be right. The clouds above them began to break, and a thin ray of sunlight touched the grave. Lily looked at it and smiled faintly. See? He's listening. Mr. Bennet watched her, silent. He felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest, a mixture of sadness and curiosity. He wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, but something stopped him. When he finally stood to leave, he said quietly, You're a very strong girl, Lily. But sometimes when people we love go away, it feels like they're still here because our hearts don't want to let them go. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. But what if they really didn't go? He didn't answer. He just nodded, unsure of what to say. That night, as he drove back to his city home, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her small voice echoed in his mind. He's still alive. He tried to distract himself with work, but her words kept returning. The story didn't make sense, and yet there were tiny details that wouldn't leave him alone. The untrained doctor, the rushed funeral, the lack of an autopsy. By midnight, he was still awake, staring at his ceiling. He didn't know why he cared so much, but something about that child's certainty felt real. The next morning, when he looked at his calendar full of meetings and appointments, he closed it. He had already decided. He was going back to that small town. The next morning was bright, but Mr. Bennet woke up feeling strangely heavy. He had tossed and turned all night, thinking about the girl at the cemetery, her soft voice, her small trembling hands, and the way she said, He's still alive. He wasn't the kind of man who got caught up in emotional things. He had built his life on logic and hard work. He ran several businesses, managed hundreds of employees, and was known for being calm and practical. But for the first time in years, he couldn't focus on his morning routine. While he drank his coffee, he kept remembering the look in that little girl's eyes, not of madness or confusion, but of deep certainty. Something about it pulled him in a way he didn't understand. By noon, he gave up trying to ignore it. He took his car keys and drove back toward the small town. He told himself he just wanted to make sure the girl was okay. That was all. When he reached the cemetery again, the air was quiet. The sun was warmer now, and the sound of birds filled the space. He didn't see Lily at first, but as he walked toward the same grave, he spotted her sitting on the grass with her school bag beside her. She was drawing something on a piece of paper, maybe the grave, maybe her father's face. When she saw him, she looked surprised. You came back, she said softly. He smiled gently. I was in the area, he said, even though that was a lie. I wanted to check on you. Are you okay? She nodded. I come here every day after school. He sat down near her, keeping a respectful distance. Do you talk to him every time? Yes, she said. Sometimes I tell him about my day. Sometimes I just listen. He tilted his head. Listen? She hesitated, then whispered, "Sometimes when I'm really quiet, I can hear him. It's like a soft sound from under the ground, like tapping or whispering. Mom says I imagine it, but I don't." Her words made him uneasy again. He didn't believe in such things, but her calm tone gave him chills. "Lily," he said carefully, "can I ask you something? The day your father passed, do you remember exactly what happened?" She nodded slowly. "He was working in the garage. There was a smell. Mom said it was gas. When I went to get him, he was lying on the floor. I shook him, but he didn't wake up. The doctor came later and said he wasn't breathing. Then they took him away." Mr. Bennett listened closely. "Who was the doctor?" "I don't remember his name," she said. "He was new, I think. Mom said the hospital was short on doctors that day because the power went out." That made him pause. "The power went out?" "Yeah," she said. Everything was dark for a while. He frowned slightly. Something about that didn't sit right with him. A gas leak accident, a power outage, and a rushed diagnosis, and it all sounded strange. "Did they check properly?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. Mom said we couldn't afford all those hospital things. They just said he was gone." He looked at the grave again, then at her. "Lily, do you think maybe you want to believe he's alive because you miss him?" She looked straight into his eyes and said softly, "No. I know he's alive because I can feel it. Sometimes when I sleep, I dream of him calling me, not in a scary way, but in a real way, like he's asking me to help." Her voice trembled at the end, but there was something so honest about it that he couldn't dismiss her. A cold breeze passed, and Mr. Bennett stayed quiet for a long moment. He didn't know what to say, but one thought began to form in his mind. What if there had been a mistake? He stood up slowly. "Lily," he said, "can I talk to your mother? Maybe she can tell me more about what happened." She hesitated. "Mom doesn't like to talk about it. She cries every time." "I'll be careful," he promised. She nodded reluctantly, then led him down the small path toward her home. It was a modest, weathered house with peeling paint and a broken gate. The garage beside it still had a faint smell of oil and dust. Tools were scattered inside, covered in cobwebs. When Lily's mother opened the door, she looked tired, not just from work, but from years of pain. Her eyes were puffy and her hands looked worn from cleaning and waitressing. She seemed startled to see a stranger standing there with her daughter. "Hello," Mr. Bennett said politely. "I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Bennett. I met your daughter at the cemetery. She spoke about her father and I just wanted to—" Before he could finish, the woman raised her hand slightly. "I know what she says," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I know she thinks her father's still alive. But it's not true. She's just a child trying to cope. I've tried everything, therapy, prayers, even moving away, but she won't stop saying it." Mr. Bennett nodded gently. "I understand. But may I ask, how sure are you about what happened? About his death?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, who confirmed it? The hospital? Was there a full report?" She looked at him as if trying to decide whether to be offended or just tired. "The doctor said he was gone. We didn't have money for more tests. The power was out at the time, but they checked his pulse and breathing. He was cold. What else could it be?" Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I don't mean to upset you. But sometimes in rare cases, people are declared dead when they're not, especially during power failures or emergencies. It's uncommon, but it happens." She stared at him. "Are you saying my husband might be alive?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know, but I think it's worth checking. For peace of mind, yours and your daughter's." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then she sighed and sat down, burying her face in her hands. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "After the funeral, I tried to move on. I couldn't handle it anymore. I can't open that pain again." Mr. Bennett respected her feelings, but he couldn't shake the thought that something was off. He gently asked if she had the hospital papers. She went into the other room and brought back an envelope filled with documents: the death certificate, a short medical note, and a few receipts. When he read the report, something caught his eye. The signature at the bottom was from a medical trainee, not a full doctor. The report also had a note saying, "No autopsy performed due to financial limitations." That bothered him deeply. "Do you remember this doctor?" he asked. She shook her head. He was young, maybe 25. He didn't even look confident. "But what choice did we have?" Mr. Bennett felt a cold feeling in his chest. He thanked her and promised not to trouble her again, then left the house. Outside, Lily followed him quietly. "Are you going to help me?" she asked in a small voice. He looked down at her and gave a faint smile. "I'll try. I just need to find out what really happened." Her eyes brightened for the first time. "Thank you." That evening, Mr. Bennett went to a small diner in town and pulled out his laptop. Using his business contacts, he started searching for hospital records from that day. It took some effort, but eventually he found the trainee doctor's name. He had been dismissed from the hospital 2 months after the incident, for negligence. That word made Mr. Bennett's heart race. Negligence. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Could it be possible? Could Lily actually be right? He couldn't sleep that night either. The more he thought about it, the more the small details added up. The rushed burial, the lack of proper tests, the unsteady doctor, and the strange noises at the grave. Late that night, as he sat in his car parked near the cemetery, he watched the quiet darkness. The wind moved through the trees and the moonlight touched the rows of graves. He turned off the engine and stepped out, walking to the same spot where Lily always sat. He crouched down beside the grave and stayed still, listening. For several minutes there was nothing. Then, faintly, very faintly, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. It was soft, irregular. Like tapping, he froze. His breath caught in his chest. He leaned closer, the sound came again. Tap, tap. He stepped back quickly, his heart pounding. He looked around, but there was no one. The grave was still. The cemetery was empty. For the first time, Mr. Bennett felt something he couldn't explain. Not fear, but disbelief mixed with hope. He didn't know what it meant yet. But one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away now. He looked down at the grave and whispered, almost to himself, "If you're really down there, I'll find you." Then he turned and walked back toward his car, already planning his next move. The next morning, the sun rose behind a layer of soft clouds, casting a pale light over the small town. Mr. Bennett had barely slept. He kept replaying the sound he'd heard at the cemetery, that faint tapping noise that came from below the ground. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was a loose stone or a small animal. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He had heard it clearly, too slow, too deliberate to be random. By the time the town was waking up, he had already made up his mind. He wasn't leaving until he knew the truth. He drove straight to the local records office, a small, quiet building near the center of town. The woman behind the counter looked bored as she stamped papers and organized files. When he asked for the death certificate and burial records of Lily's father, she raised an eyebrow. "Why do you need that, sir?" she asked. "I'm doing some research," he said calmly, handing her his business card. His name alone carried enough weight to make people listen. She disappeared into the back and returned a few minutes later with a thin file. "That's all we have," she said. He opened it right there on the counter. It was short, just a few handwritten lines. Cause of death, gas inhalation. Confirmation by Dr. R. Hall, trainee physician. Burial authorized within 24 hours. No autopsy. That last line stood out again. No autopsy. No proper check. He looked up at the woman. "Was there any follow-up or inspection?" She shook her head. "Not that I know of. Small towns don't usually do much paperwork if the family agrees to a quick burial." He nodded slowly, thanked her, and left. As he stepped outside, his phone buzzed. It was Lily. He had given her his number the day before in case she needed someone to talk to. "Mr. Bennett," her small voice came through. "I heard it again last night." He stopped walking. "You did?" "Yes, I went to the grave after dinner. It was quiet, but then I heard knocking again. 3 times. I counted." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Okay, Lily, listen, don't go there alone anymore, all right? I'll handle it. I promise." He could hear her breathing on the other end, trembling but hopeful. "Do you really believe me now?" He took a deep breath. "Yes," he said softly. "I believe you." After hanging up, he called one of his trusted business contacts, a private investigator named Howard, someone who owed him a few favors. He asked him to dig up every detail about the doctor who had signed the death certificate and the hospital that handled the case. By the evening, Howard called back. "You're not going to like this," he said. "That trainee doctor, Richard Hall, was fired a few months after that case. Apparently, there were complaints about him declaring patients dead too quickly. In one case, the patient woke up in the morgue. Mr. Bennett's hand tightened on the phone. Are you serious? Completely. The hospital kept it quiet to avoid a lawsuit. He disappeared after that. No license, no address. Mr. Bennett didn't speak for a moment. His heart was beating fast now. This wasn't just a child's imagination anymore. Something had gone terribly wrong. He hung up and sat in silence for a while, staring at the road ahead. Then he started the car and drove back to Lily's house. It was getting dark when he arrived. The lights inside were dim, and Lily's mother opened the door cautiously. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Bennett," she said wearily. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said firmly. "It's important." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He sat at the small kitchen table while she stood by the counter, arms crossed. "I looked into the doctor who declared your husband dead." He began carefully. He wasn't experienced, and he made mistakes, some serious ones. "There's a chance your husband wasn't really gone." She froze, her face going pale. "That's not possible." "I'm not saying it's certain," he continued. "But the more I look at it, the stranger it seems." The report was incomplete. There was no autopsy, no final check. And the cemetery? There's something odd about it. Her lips trembled. Odd how? He hesitated before saying it. "I heard something there. Last night." She stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. "You heard something?" He nodded slowly. "A sound. From under the ground. I thought maybe I imagined it, but your daughter heard it too." "More than once." The color drained from her face. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this to us. Don't give her more hope. She's been through enough." "I'm not trying to hurt her," he said softly. "But if there's even the smallest chance that he's alive, don't you want to know?" Her hands shook. She didn't answer. After a long pause, she whispered, "And if he isn't? What then? What if we dig him up and find nothing but a body? What will that do to her?" He didn't have an answer for that. He only said, "Sometimes the truth hurts less than not knowing." For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, she sat down slowly, her eyes glistening. "If you really think something's wrong," she said, "you'll need permission from the town council to open the grave." "You can't just do it," he nodded. "I'll take care of that." That night, he used every connection he had. He called lawyers, town officials, even an old friend in the legal department. By morning, he had a signed document allowing a supervised exhumation for medical investigation purposes. The next day, a small group gathered at the cemetery. A police officer, a local doctor, a gravedigger, Lily and her mother, and Mr. Bennett. The air was heavy and the sky was dull and gray. Lily stood quietly, holding her mother's hand. When the gravedigger started removing the soil, the sound of shovels echoed in the still air. No one spoke. Every few minutes, Mr. Bennett's heart pounded harder. Finally, after nearly an hour, the wooden lid of the coffin came into view. It looked old but undisturbed. The gravedigger brushed away the dirt and looked up for confirmation. "Shall I open it, sir?" Mr. Bennett nodded. The man bent down, pried open the nails, and slowly lifted the lid. Everyone leaned in, and then gasped. The coffin was empty. Not completely empty. There were traces of torn fabric, a few broken wooden splinters, and what looked like claw marks on the inside of the lid. But no body. No bones. Nothing. Lily's mother let out a small cry and covered her mouth. The police officer stepped back, whispering something under his breath. The gravedigger crossed himself. Mr. Bennett just stood there, frozen. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. Lily stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I told you," she whispered. "I told everyone he wasn't gone." Tears filled her eyes, but there was something else there too. Relief. Mr. Bennett knelt beside the grave, staring into the empty space. The marks on the wood looked real, too real. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't normal. He turned to the officer. "We need to find out where that body went. Check every record, every hospital. Someone knows something." The officer nodded quickly, still shaken. "We'll investigate." As they covered the grave again, Lily's mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing quietly. Mr. Bennett helped her up and said softly, "I don't know what happened yet, but I promise you I'll find the truth." That evening, news of the exhumation spread across town. People whispered about the empty coffin, about strange things happening at the cemetery. Some said the body had been stolen. Others said it had been buried alive and escaped. Mr. Bennett didn't care about the rumors. He went straight back to his car and called Howard again. "Find out if there are any private clinics or long-term care centers near this town," he said. "Someplace quiet off the record. And check if any unknown patients were admitted around the same time as the burial." Howard sighed. "That might take time." "Do it fast," Mr. Bennett said. "Something's not right here." When he hung up, he sat there for a long while staring at the graveyard through his windshield. He felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He looked up at the darkening sky and whispered to himself, "Where are you?" He didn't know it yet, but the answers he was looking for were closer than he thought, and they were about to change everything. That night felt longer than any other for Mr. Bennett. He sat on his couch, staring at the wall, unable to calm the uneasiness in his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear that faint sound he had caught near the grave, a soft tapping that seemed too real to be his imagination. He had always believed in logic and facts and what could be seen and proven, but now he wasn't sure of anything. The next morning, as the first light came through the curtains, he made a decision. He couldn't let this go. He owed it to that little girl who stood by her father's grave every single day, crying and whispering words that no one believed. He felt it deep inside. Something was wrong. He drove back to the small town, this time not caring about what anyone thought. The air felt heavy and the streets were quiet, as if the whole town was still asleep. When he reached the cemetery, Lily and her mother were already there. The girl looked tired, her eyes swollen from crying, but the moment she saw Mr. Bennett, she ran to him and said, "Did you hear it too?" He nodded slowly. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't lie. "I heard something," he said softly. "I don't know what it was, but I heard it." Her mother looked at him with disbelief. "Please, sir, don't encourage her." "She's been through enough," she said, her voice trembling. "There's no one down there. My husband is gone. We need to move on." But the look in Lily's eyes said something else. It was hope, desperate and fragile, but still there. Mr. Bennett could not ignore it. He tried speaking to the town authorities first. He met with the police chief, an older man with a thick mustache who looked annoyed from the moment the conversation started. "You want to open a grave because a child said she heard something?" the chief said, shaking his head. "Sir, that's ridiculous. The man's been buried for months. It's impossible." Mr. Bennett explained about the missing autopsy report, the incomplete death certificate, and the strange noise. The chief sighed. "Even if everything you're saying is true, we can't dig up a grave without a court order." That answer wasn't enough for him. He left the office, frustrated but not defeated. He had dealt with bureaucracy before him in business, in life. He knew that sometimes when rules stood in the way of the truth, you had to find another way. So he went to a private investigator he trusted from a past business deal. The man was rough-looking but smart, someone who could find out anything if given the right reason. Mr. Bennett explained the whole story, from the girl's words to the hospital report to the noise at the grave. The investigator listened carefully and said, "If this is true, something's being hidden. I'll help you get the permission." It took 2 days of paperwork, calls, and quiet pressure from Mr. Bennett's lawyer. Finally, they got a limited legal order to open the grave for medical verification. It wasn't easy. The local officials tried to delay it. The caretaker refused at first, and half the town started whispering that Mr. Bennett had lost his mind. But he didn't care. On the morning of the exhumation, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. A small group gathered near the grave: the investigator, 2 workers, a doctor, the caretaker, and Mr. Bennett. Lily stood close by, holding her mother's hand. Her little fingers were shaking, but her eyes didn't leave the grave. The caretaker tried to protest one last time. "Sir, I've been watching over this cemetery for 20 years, he said. "That grave has never been touched. You're wasting your time." Mr. Bennett gave him a calm look. "Then let's see for ourselves." The sound of shovels digging into the earth echoed in the cold air. Every strike of the shovel seemed louder than the last. The soil was damp, heavy, and it took time. Everyone was quiet. No one spoke, not even Lily. The only sound was the digging and the faint wind moving through the trees. After a while, one of the workers stopped. His face had gone pale. "Sir," he said quietly, pointing downward, There's something strange here. They cleared the last layer of dirt and the wooden coffin finally came into view. It looked old but not damaged, just as it should after months underground. The worker knelt and checked the lock. "It's sealed," he said. Mr. Bennett nodded and the investigator stepped closer. "Let's open it." The lid was lifted slowly. Everyone leaned forward expecting to see the body inside. But what they saw made their blood run cold. The coffin was empty, completely empty, except for some torn cloth and a small piece of a blanket that looked like it had been ripped apart. There were scratches on the inside of the wood, long marks like fingernails clawing against it. The doctor gasped, stepping back. The caretaker dropped his shovel and whispered a prayer under his breath. Lily's mother screamed and fell to her knees. "No, no, this can't be," she cried. Lily just stared, frozen, tears falling silently. Mr. Bennett couldn't move. His heart pounded as the reality sank in. Someone had taken the body, or worse, someone had been alive in there. For a long moment, no one spoke. The investigator broke the silence. "This wasn't a grave robbery," he said quietly. "No valuables, no damage outside the coffin. Whoever was here wanted him gone, not anything else." The caretaker swore he had never seen anyone tamper with the grave. "I lock the gate every night," he said. "Nobody comes in." Mr. Bennett stood still, looking at the empty space where a man was supposed to rest. "Then where is he?" he said almost to himself. The doctor stepped closer and pointed at the scratch marks. "These weren't made by tools," he said softly. "They're human." The words hung in the air like cold mist. Everyone looked at the coffin again. The marks, the torn fabric, the emptiness. Lily's mother covered her face and began sobbing uncontrollably. Mr. Bennett knelt down beside her. "I don't know what happened," he said, "but I promise I'll find out." After the grave was sealed again, the group dispersed slowly. Word spread quickly across the town. Some said the man's body had been stolen for illegal research. Others whispered darker stories and that he had woken up, that he was buried alive. The truth was lost somewhere between fear and disbelief, but Mr. Bennett couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. That night he met the investigator again in his car. The man had spent the day digging through hospital records and old files. "There's something," he said, sliding a folder across the seat. Inside were papers from the local hospital, dated the day of the man's supposed death. There was a note at the bottom, "Patient transferred." No signature, no destination. Just that, Mr. Bennett frowned. "Transferred? Where?" The investigator shrugged. "That's the thing. There's no record after that. It's like he vanished from every system." They began questioning people in the town, nurses, drivers, even old hospital staff. Most said they didn't remember anything unusual. But one man, an elderly janitor who had worked at the hospital for decades, remembered something. He said that around that time a group of patients had been moved secretly at night to another facility. "They said it was for research," the old man whispered, "but no one ever saw them again." Mr. Bennett felt a chill down his spine. Could Lily's father have been one of them? He and the investigator followed every lead. They visited nearby towns, looked through government records, and checked private clinics. Every step led them to more confusion. Files missing, names erased, papers signed by people who no longer worked anywhere. Then one night, after hours of searching, the investigator called him. "I think I found something," he said. "There's a private clinic outside the city that fits the timeline. They take long-term patients, no visitors, no questions." Mr. Bennett's hands trembled slightly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the girl was right all along. Before ending the call, the investigator added quietly, "If this is real, sir, you need to be prepared. What we find there might change everything." Mr. Bennett looked out his window into the night, the sound of the wind echoing faintly. He thought of Lily, of the empty coffin, of the small voice saying, "He's still alive." He whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we find the truth." And with that, he knew there was no turning back. The mystery that started with a child's tears at her father's grave was far from over, and what waited ahead could be more shocking than anything he had ever. The next morning came quietly, with gray clouds hanging low over the sky. Mr. Bennett didn't sleep all night. His mind was filled with everything he had learned, the missing body, the false medical report, and now the name of a private clinic where patients were kept hidden from the world. He didn't know what to expect. but something deep inside told him that the truth was waiting there. He picked up the phone and called Lily's mother. She sounded weak, her voice shaking. "Have you found something?" she asked softly. "I think I have," he replied. "There's a clinic outside the city. I'm going there today." There was silence on the line before she said, "If there's any chance, please bring him home." Mr. Bennett promised he would. Then he called the private investigator and told him to meet him near the highway. The two men drove in silence for almost an hour, passing through empty roads and quiet fields. The air felt heavy, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. Finally, they saw a tall iron gate at the end of a narrow road. Behind it stood an old white building surrounded by tall hedges. A small sign read, "Greenview Care Facility, Restricted Access." Mr. Bennett parked the car near the gate. A guard came out immediately, looking suspicious. "This is private property," he said. "No visitors allowed without approval." Mr. Bennett showed his ID and calmly replied, "I have a legal reason to be here. I believe one of your patients is connected to a false death certificate from 6 months ago." The guard frowned. "You need to speak to the director," he said, and disappeared inside the building. Minutes later, a woman in a white coat came out. She looked calm, but there was something nervous in her eyes. "I'm the director," she said politely. "I don't know what this is about." Mr. Bennett explained everything: the grave, the missing body, the hospital report, and the transfer note that led him there. As he spoke, the woman's face grew pale. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "We don't have anyone by that name." "Then let me check your patient list myself," he said. "If I'm wrong, I'll leave quietly." The director hesitated. "That's not allowed," she said. "We have confidentiality rules." Mr. Bennett stepped closer and said firmly, "If you don't let me check, I'll bring the police here within the hour. And I promise you they'll bring the media too." The woman's expression changed. After a long pause, she whispered, "Wait here." She went back inside. Mr. Bennett and the investigator exchanged glances. "She's hiding something," the investigator muttered. After nearly 15 minutes, the director returned. Her voice was quieter this time. "There's a patient who matches your description," she said. "But he was admitted under a different name. Follow me." They walked down a long hallway with white walls and closed doors on both sides. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the faint sound of machines humming could be heard. The air smelled of antiseptic. When they reached the end of the hall, the director stopped in front of a small room. "He's here," she said softly. "He was brought in 6 months ago, unresponsive. We were told he had no family." Mr. Bennett took a deep breath and slowly stepped inside. Lying on the bed was a man with thin gray hair and pale skin. His body was weak, but his chest moved slowly and he was breathing. His hands had faint scars on the wrists, as if he had struggled once. His eyes were closed, but there was a trace of life on his face. Mr. Bennett froze. It was him, Lily's father, the man who was supposed to be dead. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The reality of it was overwhelming. The man who had been buried in everyone's memory, mourned and cried over, was alive right in front of him, the director explained, her voice shaking. He was found unconscious, barely alive after a gas leak accident. When the local hospital lost power, they transferred him here for emergency treatment, but the paperwork was lost during the process. We didn't know anyone was looking for him. Mr. Bennett turned to her, disbelief in his eyes. "You didn't know? You let a family bury an empty coffin and grieve for months?" The woman looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't meant to happen this way." Mr. Bennett didn't waste another second. He called Lily's mother and told her to come immediately. Her voice cracked as she said, "Is it really him?" "It's him," he replied. "He's alive." 2 hours later, a car pulled up outside the clinic. Lily and her mother rushed in, their faces pale from shock and fear. The moment Lily saw the man on the bed, she stopped moving. For a few seconds, she just stared, her little hands trembling. Then she whispered, "Papa?" The man's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, he opened his eyes. His gaze was weak but filled with recognition. When he saw his daughter, tears rolled down his cheeks. His lips moved and he whispered, "Lily." Lily ran to him, crying uncontrollably. She held his hand tightly and kept saying, "I told everyone you were alive. I told them." Her mother fell to her knees beside the bed, holding both of them, unable to speak. The nurse who had been standing near the door quietly wiped her own eyes. Even Mr. Bennet, who rarely showed emotion, turned away to hide the tears that had formed in his. For a long time, no one said a word. The family just stayed there, together again after months of loss, pain, and disbelief. Later, the doctors explained that he had been in a deep coma. His condition was stable now, and with care he could recover fully. It would take time, but he would live.